Welcome back, everybody, to Tricky D's Wood Shop. Today, we're going to be starting on a new one of these. But before we do that, let's do a walk through the wood shop, because I've been doing a bunch of work to make it nice in here. So as you can see, I've been getting plenty of work done around here, including assembly of pegboards and hanging of tools in a fashion that is easy and accessible and helps me get things done quickly and readily. A painting station full of multitudes of colors of different types of paints, lacquers, and rubs for finishing my woods and other art projects. A handy dandy table saw in which to cut things. Makes life much easier. In addition to the table saw, we have a router, but every good router needs a table. I did not have a router table or the funds to purchase one, so I made what I am calling a router sled. Put it like this on the table saw and clamp it right here. Then you have a functioning but simple router table. A very large shelf to hold all of my wood. A chop saw and a sander. The sander is dual purpose. It has a belt and a disc sander, even though the disc sandpaper is missing right now. Whatever shall I do? So, as you can see, the workshop is coming together nicely. I still like a few things that I don't have, but I can get the job done that I need to get done with the way things are now. So, let's get into making this chessboard, shall we? The first chessboard that I showed you earlier, I will be keeping. His name will be number 1. I will be naming all of my chessboards, with this one's name being number 1. But the next board's name will not be number 2. The next board's name will be for you to figure out. But I will give you clues along the way, so let's get started. Peace, love, and cannabis. Enough said, video over. See you guys on the next one. Nah, I'm just playing. So in all seriousness, sorry about the noise, it's the furnace, we're in the basement, it's cold outside, what can you do? So in all seriousness, we are going to be starting on another chessboard today. I have completed technically 2 so far. The first one was just a quick throw up, knock together to make sure I knew what was going on. The second one you saw in the pictures earlier, number 1, was made out of African mahogany and poplar. Poplar is all this stuff behind me here. I got a real good deal on that wood, so I'm trying to use it for different projects, but I'm not completely happy with the way it looks on a chessboard, especially next to that beautiful, beautiful African mahogany. So we're going to be making another board. And we are going to be using that African mahogany again. We have a little chunk of it left, I'll show you. So this is the remainder of our African mahogany. It started off like this, as one solid piece. I cut it in half, and then that much of it is what I used for number 1. So we have this and this left. This might be enough to get the second board done. But so we're going to be using the African mahogany, and I picked up this really nice piece of maple. It's really, really white. It's got some nice grains in it, And I think that these two are going to look really nice together. So we're going with this maple and this African mahogany. And that's your first clue to the name of this board. Alright, so the way we have to do this is I want to get as much use out of these two woods as I can because they were not cheap. The piece of mahogany, the African mahogany, it was about $60. This piece of this maple was about $35. So we want to use this wood as best as possible with as little waste as possible. So what we did on the first board is on the piece of poplar we used, it was about 1.5 inches thick. So what I did was I made the squares of that chessboard the size of this face here, squared. And then I took the poplar and cut it to those sizes. So we're going to have to kind of do the opposite with this board. Since this maple is a 4/4 thickness, which means it's 1 inch thick, and this is an 8/4, which means this is 2 inches thick. Obviously we can't make the maple 2 inches thick, and that would be too much wood for a chessboard anyway. It'd be really expensive. So we're going to try to keep the prices of the boards a little bit lower while still maintaining the quality and the really nice woods being used. So this being 1 inch thick, we're going to make this board 1 inch thick. So what we're going to have to do is cut our strips out of this board, and then we're going to have to cut this 1 inch thick this way. We're going to have to cut 1 inch strips off, and then the size of the piece is still going to be this same size. So we're going to have to cut strips off of the maple that's this width, and then we're going to have to cut strips off of the mahogany that's this height and match them up, and hopefully everything comes together nice. So we're going to go ahead and start cutting on some of this wood. I'm going to do all the measurements, and I'm not going to bore you with that because it's going to be a lot of tedious math. But I'm going to get all the measurements done, figure out exactly the best ways to cut these boards to get the most use out of them and get the wood the way I need it. And then we're going to start cutting. And the goal for today is to get the first glue up done, and I'll show you guys what that means. All right. Okay, so here's where I'm at right now. I've cut 2 lengths of the maple off that are the same length as this piece of mahogany, because this will be the overall length of the chessboard with a little extra play on it. So the next step to do is to cut these down to the size that we need them, which again is going to be the size of this end of the chessboard right here, which is just under 2 inches, or this end of the piece of wood, which is just under 2 inches. So this is going to be the size of our squares. I'm going to be able to get 3 out of this first strip, and then I'll have to take 1 out of this second strip, and then the rest will be material we use for the border and stuff. So there's a trick to how to do that. Let's see it. Alright, now since we need our piece of maple to be this thickness, the easiest way to do that is we're going to remove our angle guard here. Oops. We're going to take our other guard, our rail, and we're going to put it over here. Now the best way to get this perfect is not to measure it. We just throw our piece of wood up here, and be sure to get past this guard because it sits out a little bit more. But you get your piece of wood here. You slide your guard up against it. You don't want to press too hard, but you just get your guard resting up against it. Butthole. And clamp it in place. So now, when I cut the maple, it will be this exact same size. So let's go ahead and get that going. Before you run your saw, you always want to make sure, that you have your push stick. You always want to make sure that your blade is just barely over the height of your wood. This blade is up too high, so I'm going to lower it down to about there. I just have about 1/4 of an inch above the wood now with the blade, so now we should be good to go. Alright, so now we have our 3 pieces of maple. They're the same size as our piece of mahogany there. I have to grab the other piece of maple and cut one more strip because you need 4 strips of each color. But essentially, there we go. The next step will be to do the same thing with the mahogany, but we're going to be cutting it this way. So we'll make it this. We'll do the same thing, but we'll slide the rail over to the same thing. Oh boy. So we'll do the same thing, but we'll slide the rail over to the same thickness as the thickness of the maple here. So I'm just going to finish cutting that up, and then I'll see you on the next step. Alright, so we have all 8 of our boards cut. Everything came out smooth and perfect. So the next step is to get these glued together, which is going to be our first of 2 glue ups to get the checkerboard pattern that we need for the chessboard. So I'm going to go ahead and start getting these glued together. It's been about 6 or 7 hours since we glued this up. Did this early this morning. I actually, in that time, have done quite a few things. One of them being I went to Menards and got a couple more clamps because I felt like I didn't have quite enough clamps on here. You know, I'm still learning this process, and I kind of felt on the first one I needed more clamps on number 1, but I just didn't act on that. But on this one I actually went and acted on it, so I went and got some more clamps. I got them on here, so right now on here is 11 clamps, 3 on each end and 5 going across the sides. The 3 on each end are actually holding the board down to keep it flat, and then the ones on the sides are the ones holding it together for the glue up. I'm sure as you saw in that before we left a minute ago, I ran completely out of glue gluing this up. So I went and got 2 more bottles of glue. So now we have plenty of glue. So the surface of this one is already much smoother and much more square than the surface of the last one at this stage, because I didn't have those extra clamps to clamp it down to make it flat. And another thing that that I learned on the last one was to not to try to build it on the desk, on the worktop, because it's not exactly flat. It has little ridges and stuff in it. So you can see I clamped it to this board. But actually what I discovered when I was clamping it to this board, that if I put another board under this board that's smaller than this board, then I can get the clamps all the way around the board and have it on the countertop at the same time. The workstation, whatever. I keep calling it all kinds of shit. So what we're going to do is I'm going to unclamp this, put it to the side for now, and then I'm actually going to glue together these 2 pieces of wood that are clamped, that I've used to clamp this chessboard on, and we're going to make a little jig for flattening all of the chessboards from now on, just by gluing these 2 pieces of wood together, basically. And then we're going to cut this back up the other direction and get it glued back up again. All right, so let's go ahead and get to work. Alright, so I've got all the clamps off. This is where we're at right now. Everything's looking good, nice and flat. Yeah, much better than when I started right here with number 1. Number 1 required an awful lot of sanding, about 6 hours of me sanding just to get it smoothed out and squared again, because it had bowed a little bit like this when I had it clamped together, because I didn't have the extra clamps to clamp it down as well. So it cost me a lot of extra time sanding. This one I shouldn't have as much of a problem with. So this jig we're gonna make is basically just gonna be this piece of wood with this piece of wood glued up to the bottom of it, centered. Like this. Just like that. And then we'll also have, I have all of these marked as front, back, left, and right to clamp the board in with, because you don't want to use the clamps directly on your good wood because you'll leave clamp marks. There's little circles. Hold on a second. So the clamps have round feet, and they will leave these little circle marks in your wood. On top of that, your boards press together more evenly if they have a big strip pressing them together all the way around. So these 2 pieces of wood and these 4 pieces of wood are basically going to make up our chessboard glue together jig. One other thing I thought about after I had glued this up. So after you glue these up, or as you glue them up, when you squeeze them together, a little bit of glue is always going to come out of the seams. And I didn't want the board to stick to this board, so I kind of waited until this stuff dried a little bit. But I had an idea. What I'm going to do from now on is when I go to put the board on here to glue it up, I'm going to put a piece of parchment paper on top of the wood, in between the wood and the chessboard or the cutting board or whatever I'm doing at the time. That way, when the glue dries, it'll only be glued to the parchment paper and the piece I'm working on, and not to the piece it's gluing up to. That way I don't get any glue on this piece to disturb the surface of this piece, and I don't glue a piece to this piece. So I'm also going to be doing that from now on. So I'm going to get to working on getting this glued up, and then as the glue is drying on this, we'll go ahead and get started cutting these the other direction to make our tiles. Alright, let me stop before this video gets demonetized and flagged and taken down. Alright, so we got our little jig glued together. Got 6 clamps on it right now. We're just going to let that sit for a couple hours, get dried up. While that's drying, we'll go ahead and get our other cuts done on the board. So just like we did earlier, we're going to line the table saw up to the size of the edge of this board, because that's the size of our tiles. And then we're going to cut this direction, and that'll give us all of our tiles. And then I'll show you how we assemble the board from there and do our second glue up. So let's get back to work. So we got the board cut up the rest of the way. I'm sure as you saw while we were cutting, we had a couple problems. A couple of the boards did this, where some of the pieces came apart, where the glue wasn't strong enough. Honestly, I kind of expected this to happen, because as you saw, I ran out of glue during the glue up, and I kind of knew that I didn't have enough, but I was already too far in and just had to glue it up. So it's not really a big issue. It's half of them. Half of them have somewhere where they came apart like that, but it's not a big deal. I'll just glue them back together once our jig finishes drying here, and then we'll get back to work. It's not going to slow us down at all. Alright, so the way we turn this into a chessboard, now that we have all of our slices, this is actually 9 slices. We only need 8. I always like to have one extra slice in case something I can't fix goes wrong. So let's just go ahead and move one of these slices out of the way here. Now, the way we turn this into a chessboard, it's pretty simple. You just flip every other slice like this. Slice flipped. Slice flipped. Slice flipped. Slice flipped. Slice flipped. Slice flipped. So now, as you can see, we have a chessboard pattern. A beautiful, lovely chessboard pattern. Just by flipping every other tile around. It's really that simple. Just go from that to that. And then the next step is to do another glue up where we glue all of these strips together. And then that gives us our basic chessboard shape. And then from there, we just do all of our sanding and buffing and get the board nice and smooth and perfect, and then we build a frame for it, whatever our frame may be. So this is about as far as we can get tonight because we have this gluing up. So while this dries, so I can fix this, we're just going to wait overnight for that to happen. But I just wanted to come down here and get this done and get this started. That way tomorrow I don't have to worry about wasting time with this thing. Also tomorrow morning, I got a call after we did this earlier. I have a second interview for a job tomorrow. I went in and did the first interview last week, which was a series of tests for an electronics technician position, which is actually what I went to school for way back in the day. So got an interview for that tomorrow. We'll see if we get the job. So wish me luck on that, even though you won't see this until after that's over. So I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. We'll let this dry up. Tomorrow we'll fix these tiles and get our second glue up on this and get our second board closer to being finished. So thank you guys, much love. We'll see you tomorrow. Peace.